When you think of Cartoon Network, one of the first shows that'll pop into your head will most definitely be the Powerpuff Girls. Running for 6 seasons from 1998 to 2005, Powerpuff Girls was very easily one of the network's biggest hits, with the show being praised for its memorable and charming characters, witty writing, and stellar art direction under Craig McCracken. Now, I personally wasn't invested in the show back when I was a mere sock boy, given that 6-year-old me was convinced, ew, girl show bad. However, by the time I entered my teens, I was able to recognize the absolute brilliance of the Powerpuff Girls, and appreciate it for the classic that it is. Despite having a good run though, like most successful properties, Cartoon Network would attempt to bring this show back, multiple times actually. Since the show's conclusion, we would get projects such as Powerpuff Girls Z, an anime that reimagines the cartoon as a magical girls show that you know literally nothing about, the Powerpuff Girls Rule, a flash animated one-off special meant to celebrate the show's 10th anniversary, and Powerpuff Girls Dance Path, another one-off special, this time done in CGI. While these follow-ups to the Powerpuff Girls have something of a divisive reputation, they do have their fans who appreciate them, despite being tonally and stylistically different from the original series. However, there is one entry in the Powerpuff Girls franchise that has earned near universal disdain from the fan base. I of course am talking about the 2016 Powerpuff Girls reboot. The show was created as an attempt to modernize the Powerpuff Girls, with a stronger emphasis on inclusivity and girl power, as well as focusing less on fighting villains and more on their personal lives. Cartoon Network hyped the hell out of this show, having released numerous promos for Powerpuff Girls 2016 during the months leading up to its premiere. You could tell that CM believed that this reboot was going to be a huge success, on par with Steven Universe and Teen Titans Go. And why wouldn't it be? It's a reimagining of one of their most iconic shows. Surely it'll be a massive hit. It was not a massive hit. While running for a respectable 3 seasons across 120 11-minute episodes, it was critically panned by audiences not just for failing to be faithful to the original show, but just not working well as a show under its own merit. It definitely didn't help that the show would find itself knee-deep in more than a few controversies. It's to a point that, to this day, many consider Powerpuff Girls 2016 to be the worst thing to come out of Cartoon Network in the 2010s, if not in the entire history of the network. Despite having a strong advertising campaign, as well as taking up quite a bit of airtime early in its run, Powerpuff Girls 2016 would suffer from lackluster ratings that would only decline as it went on. As a result, its presence on the network would quickly vanish. By the start of Season 2, CN would straight up stop promoting the show, with it almost never getting reruns or advertisements, and its premieres being relegated to Saturday or Sunday evenings, when all of the great cartoons premiere, the sole exception being The Power of Four, a multi-part special that introduced the 4th Powerpuff Girl, Bliss, even though she's technically the first Powerpuff Girl, and that's just ignoring Bunny, I guess, who may or may not exist in this continuity. I don't really know. That's not the point. Not even something as big as that was enough to keep the attention of audiences. The show would abruptly end without fanfare in June of 2019. Since then, Cartoon Network has done well to acknowledge the reboot's existence, outside of the occasional social media posts using the Powerpuff Yourself character creator to celebrate women's achievements. Eventually, CN would opt out of producing merchandise for Powerpuff Girls 2016 altogether, and go back to using the designs and imagery of the original show to promote the Powerpuff Girls brand. Needless to say, this wasn't the smash hit the executives wanted it to be, but surely it can't be that awful. I mean, I'm the guy behind the Emmy Award nominated video defending Thundercats Roar. Maybe it's bad. It's actually pretty bad. Granted, I wasn't as angry or outraged at Powerpuff Girls 2016 as most, given that I didn't really grow up with it as a kid. Again, ew girls show. In fact, I actually went into this show with cautious optimism and genuinely gave it a shot, but after watching a handful of the earlier episodes, I dropped it. Despite my best efforts, I just couldn't get into the show. It just didn't do anything for me. And after seeing what else the reboot would get up to via Shadow Street's videos, I can safely say that unfortunately, Powerpuff Girls 2016 earned the ire it got. So what exactly about this show made so many, including myself, to view it as nothing short of a complete mess? Well, let's find out as we dive into this very peculiar reboot. The core premise of Powerpuff Girls 2016 is similar to the original shows, being about a trio of superpowered kindergartners who fight crime and defend the city of Townsville, while also doing kid stuff like going to school and playing with their dad. However, like I said earlier, there's less focus on the girls fighting crime this time around, with their school and social lives being given greater emphasis in an effort to make the characters more interesting. Now, putting less focus on action and crime fighting is a weird decision, given how one of the most iconic aspects of OG Powerpuff Girls was how unapologetically violent it was. But placing greater focus on the Powerpuff Girls' daily lives could work if the show manages to bring interesting plots and solid writing to the table, something that is severely lacking in Powerpuff Girls 2016. The plots largely consist of run-of-the-mill stories that are capped off with pretty basic ASOP, like be responsible or be true to yourself, with the school stuff being particularly bland. While most episodes typically have a threat that the girls have to take care of, said threats are usually pretty tame and simply don't make for interesting conflict. It all just feels kind of boring, and despite the shift in direction apparently being done to give the girls depth, I'd argue the show does the opposite, which brings me to the Powerpuff Girls themselves. Of the three, Blossom is the one who has the most unflattering portrayal, with most of her positive traits being heavily downplayed. While OG Blossom was a confident, intelligent leader who could be bossy at times, here she's an obsessive mess who feels the need to be the smartest person in the room, and lacks her original counterpart's level-headedness and leadership skills. That's not even getting into how Powerpuff Girls 2016 feels the need to constantly remind us that she's the smart one. Yes, we get it. Blossom likes boring stuff like taxes and being organized. You don't have to keep on reminding us. Bubbles is handled the best out of the girls. She did have this weird, bratty, temperamental streak early on. As the show progressed, Bubbles would more closely resemble her cheerful, sweet, slightly airheaded self. Granted, the writing for her isn't nearly as charming or endearing as it was in the original show. She's still decently likable. Buttercup is weird in that she started out tolerable and fairly in line with the tomboy jerk with a heart of gold attitude she had in the original show. However, Buttercup's jerkiness would drastically increase, and she becomes this utterly obnoxious, self-centered dick. She just comes off as an absolute tryhard here. What makes it worse is that the show has this strange favoritism towards her, with Buttercup getting the most focused episodes, and consistently being portrayed as more competent than her sisters, which just makes her all the more irritating. As a whole, the Powerpuff Girls aren't very interesting in this show, and come across more like blunderized versions of themselves. This wouldn't be as much of a problem if Powerpuff Girls 2016 was aiming to provide a simpler, sillier take on the characters, like with Teen Titans Go or Thundercats Roar, but as I mentioned earlier, that's not at all what the show was trying to go for. The show wants to give the girls additional characterization, but its attempts at giving them more depth rarely extend beyond giving them an interest that might get referenced every now and then. Okay, to be fair, this isn't always the case. For instance, the episode Bubbles the Blue has Bubbles feeling uncharacteristically down and Blossom and Buttercup being unsure as to how to deal with it. There's no real reason for it. Bubbles just felt a bit sad that day, and after spending the episode trying so hard to cheer her up, the two come to the conclusion that there's nothing wrong with that, and they realize it's best if they just show our support and be there for Bubbles during this time. It's nothing special or groundbreaking, but this was an instance where Powerpuff Girls 2016's more slice-of-life approach allowed for something interesting to be done with the characters and their dynamic. Sadly, episodes like these are rare, and these versions of the Powerpuff Girls more often than not range from bland to outright annoying. The one really weird thing I want to add about the girls in Powerpuff Girls 2016 is that despite being presented as kindergarten age, it often feels like they're written to be middle schoolers. Like, sometimes we see them do stuff like playing with stuffed animals, but other times they're involved with stuff like boy bands and internet fame and running for class president, stuff that preteens would be more interested in. It honestly feels like the writers really wanted the girls to be middle school age, but couldn't for whatever reason, yet decided to write them as if they were half the time anyway. It kind of feels like what happened with Amphibia, where Disney forced them to make Anne, Sasha, and Marcy 13, but the show treats them as if they were 15 like the creator intended, only it's not as noticeable there, because there isn't nearly as much of a difference between 13 and 15-year-olds as there are between kindergartners and middle schoolers. It just makes the characters feel a bit off. It makes me wonder if the show intentionally had the new voice actresses make the girls sound older than they did in the original show. Speaking of which, the Powerpuff Girls were getting new voice actresses for this show, which was a major turnoff for fans, especially given that the original voice actresses for the girls were vocal in their disappointment that Cartoon Network didn't ask them to reprise their roles. That said, I personally don't mind their new voices. Now don't get me wrong, they can never replace the girls' original voice actresses, and it is kind of weird how they sound older this time around, but I honestly think that the new actresses did a good job in giving the Powerpuff Girls voices that fit their characters.
That's not my Zoom dude.
Yeah, but what is it? You mean besides the cutest little buddy ever?
It just sucks that the voice actresses aren't really given that much to work with, because I truly believe they're talented and have solid comedic timing. Just look at Blossom's voice actress Amanda Lake, who's going to voice Polly in Amphibia, where she consistently gives one of the funniest performances in the show.
You're not gonna eat us, are you? You're not even gonna try. Disappointing.
So with all my complaints about how the Powerpuff Girls themselves are handled, at the very least they were given solid vocal performances. Now the Powerpuff Girls themselves aren't the only ones on this show. How do the supporting characters fare? Well, there's Professor Eutonium, the girl's father and creator, who in the original show was one of the greatest fictional dads ever, being a loving, firm, kind, reasonable figure who absolutely thinks the world of his girls. However, Powerpuff Girls 2016 decided to take this character in a bold new direction by, and get this, making him into a bumbling idiot. That is just brilliant. I have never in my life seen a fictional father be portrayed as an idiot. That is so original. This show is breaking new ground, people. In all seriousness though, it really sucks that the show took a father character as well written as the professor and turned him into every other generic bumbling dad. It's a serious disservice to the character. Also returning is the mayor, who, while being largely unchanged, he doesn't work nearly as well without Miss Bellum to act as a straight man to his antics. Oh right, Miss Bellum isn't really in Powerpuff Girls 2016. Well, kind of. The situation with her is really messy and we will get to her in due time. We also have Miss King coming back, who doesn't really get a whole lot to do in this reboot, but she's more or less the same character, with one slight difference. Again, we'll get to that whole situation later on. There are also a slew of new supporting characters, and I don't care about any of them. They're boring and they're not worth talking about, with two exceptions. The first and most obvious one is the brand new Powerpuff Girl and the girl's older sister, Bliss. Her story is that she was created 10 years ago by the professor in order to win some scientist competition, but because Bliss had trouble controlling her powers, she exiled herself to a desert island, with Eutonium believing she was actually dead. But now she's back to help her sisters fight crime in this 5-part special event, until she leaves to become a space cop or something. Like, the whole special was really weird, it didn't make any sense. Him was involved, there are a lot of weird retcons, it was kind of a mess. Although, if I'm being honest, despite this deviant OC-looking character feeling like she came straight out fanfiction, I don't hate Bliss. I wouldn't call her good, and it's clear she mostly exists to be a marketing device, but it does feel like there was an attempt to make an actual character here. Bliss is this cool big sister who wants to do good, but her difficulty controlling her destructive powers prevent her from doing so, something that she's deeply insecure about. I don't know, maybe it's just because she shares the same voice actress as Marceline, but I honestly think she's a serviceable enough character, even if the story surrounding her is complete trash. And then there's Jared. We have to talk about Jared. Now on the surface, Jared is this really bland, stereotypical nerd character that Blossom has a crush on for some reason. Except for one detail that caused a bit of a stir. For some reason, the people who designed Jared decided to have him resemble Jake Goldman, his voice actor and a writer on the show, as a sort of inside joke. This was concerning for a lot of people, since it made Jared look like a self-insert, which is very problematic when the character's written to be a 5-year-old girl's love interest. Like, did no one on the staff stop to think about how this would make the guy look? What did they think was going to happen here? It's the internet. Of course people would come to the worst conclusion. They just completely threw this man under the bus. And for what? A corny white boy with the personality of stale bread. Seriously, just why? I mean, at least this is the end of the controversies behind Powerpuff Girls 2016. Right? Right? We will get to him in due time. Anyway, let's move on to the show's villain. Now, the villains of the original Powerpuff Girls are a major reason as to why the show is so beloved. They're widely considered to be the highlight of the show for having fun, memorable personalities, while still managing to be threatening. Meanwhile, Powerpuff Girls 2016's Rogues Gallery is seen as a massive step down from the originals, with the villains getting far less focused and not being nearly as threatening or entertaining. Of the villains originating from OG Powerpuff Girls, Mojo Jojo, Prince Princess Morbucks and him are the only ones that are given any prominence, with recurring antagonists such as the Gangrene Gang, the Amoeba Boys, Fuzzy Lumpkins, and the Rowdy Rough Boys being either one-off bad guys or relegated to cameo appearances here. Does the show at least do a good job adapting the returning villains? Mojo Jojo, while originally being equal parts crafty and comical, is portrayed here as being an ineffectual joke villain who rarely poses any sort of threat to the girls. Also, for some reason, they got rid of his redundant way of speaking, despite his speech patterns being one of Mojo's most memorable traits. That said, despite the new angle for the character being a massive downgrade from his original self, Reboot Mojo still manages to be a decently entertained villain for what he is, and is even given his fair share of funny moments. Princess Morbucks was always one of the lesser villains of the original show, with her honestly not having that much going on beyond her spoiled brat shtick. And on paper, the reboot version of her should be more engaging. Her brattiness gets downplayed in favor of a more egotistical personality, and she's given a more personal rivalry with Blossom, which will lead to a later Season 1 episode, Morbucks, which is about Blossom helping Morbucks in her time of need, and the two ending up genuinely becoming friends. Despite all of this, Morbucks is still pretty one-note and not super entertaining. And while her relationship with Blossom could have been interesting, they do virtually nothing with it, with their rivalry being relegated to boring school stuff, and the friendship they formed in Morbucks being completely forgotten in future episodes. There was definitely potential in this version of Morbucks, but they just don't do anything with it. Out of all of the returning characters, him is the only one that comes out mostly unscathed. He's still the same manipulative, camp, reality warping demon that he was in the original, albeit much tamer. None of the plots with him are anywhere near as dark in this show, which sucks, but he's still a good villain, at least for what little screen time he has. Despite him originally being second only to Mojo Jojo in prominence, for some reason the reboot only really uses him for like 5 episodes. Because of course the one returning character from Powerpuff Girls that they did an okay job with adapting is barely in the reboot. Because we can't have nice things in this house. Also, there are episodes where they forget to add the reverb effect on him's voice.
Come with me and show everyone what you can do. Sorry, but your soul is mine.
So that's neat, I guess. Alongside old foes, there are also plenty of new villains, and they aren't great. I mean, a few of the new villains are mildly amusing, but as a whole, they're largely forgettable, and I don't care about them. I actually intend to go into a bit of detail about each one, but I decided that would be redundant since it would pretty much be me going, wow, this villain isn't very interesting, for about a minute or so. And then there's Silico. Silico is far and away the best thing about Powerpuff Girls 2016, and perhaps the only element of the show that's fondly remembered in any way. Silico is this manipulative, evil genius who uses robots and hologram technology to screw with the Powerpuff Girls, and always comes dangerously close to destroying them. He's unlike any other villain in the franchise, being much more of a schemer who prefers to stay behind the scenes, in contrast to the bombastic attitudes more typical of Powerpuff Girls bad guys. He's the kind of villain who's able to play everyone like fiddles, and always seems to have a new scheme or a backup plan at the ready whenever he's defeated. Not only that, but he's one of the few villains in the show who's completely played seriously, and is given little in the way of comedic traits. I mean, he's not OG him levels of dark, but it's still really refreshing to see a genuinely threatening, dangerous villain in a show that has so little bite to it. His design is also really cool. He's this menacing figure who's always shrouded in shadows, save for his large, glowing green eyes. It helps that he's also drawn in a more angular style that's reminiscent of the original show. Sadly, as much of a breath of fresh air Silico was to this show, there are issues with him that hold him back from being a truly great villain. First off, his backstory just sucks. His motive for wanting to destroy the girls? They accidentally destroyed his robot friends as a kid. That's it. That's really it. Bro, just build new ones. Also, what? Silico's an adult. How could the girls have wronged him when he was a child? Is the show implying the girls don't age? This is literally never addressed at all. It's really weird. Maybe they could have revealed later on that Bliss was the one who accidentally destroyed his robots. That makes sense for the character and would line up better timeline-wise. But that would make too much sense for this show. My other issue is that, despite Powerpuff Girls 2016 treating him as a bigger deal than the other villains, the show does very little with Silico. While he has more main villain roles than the rest of the new antagonists, that sadly only amounts to 5 episodes. Which is weird since the way they set him up in Viral Spiral made it seem like he was going to be a major player, if not the main villain of the show, instead of just another member of the Girls Rogues Gallery. Which is a shame because Silico had a ton of potential as a villain, and having him be the show's big bad could have taken Powerpuff Girls 2016 in a really interesting direction. As is, though, while still a cool villain, Silico ultimately failed to live up to his fullest potential. Overall, for a reboot of a show famous for its villain, Powerpuff Girls 2016 doesn't do a whole lot with their rogues gallery. There are some decent ideas for villains here, but the majority of the show's bad guys are just forgettable and non-threatening. Visually, the show doesn't fare much better. In contrast to the original show, which utilized bold outlines and sharp edges in its character designs, Powerpuff Girls 2016 would use a thin-lined, rounder look similar to many 2010s cartoons. Now, I personally don't mind the thin-line look that a lot of modern cartoons use. After all, I genuinely thought the characters of Thundercats Roar looked appealing. Here's the thing, though. While Thundercats Roar would completely overhaul the look of the world of Thundercats, Powerpuff Girls 2016 basically took the characters of the original show and dumped them into a show with a very stereotypical thin-lined art style akin to something like Clarence. And it just looks off. The original and new characters just clash so badly with each other. It's distracting. And to add to the uncanniness, the characters, specifically the girls, use more exaggerated expressions when compared to the original show. I mean, I personally don't mind whenever they have wingding eyes, but these super exaggerated expressions just look off when used on these characters. The Powerpuff Girls is a very well-known show with a very distinct look. You can't just have these characters look nearly identical to how they originally were, and completely change the rules used to animate them without them looking at least a bit uncanny. This could have been avoided if they fully committed to giving the girls a new look so they'll fit in with this new style. Say what you will about Thundercats Roar's character designs, but at least all of the characters feel like they're a part of the same show. Its character designs at least managed to be memorable, in contrast to how run-of-the-mill Powerpuff Girls 2016's characters look. Not helping matters is the animation, which feels so lifeless most of the time. It lacks the impact and sharp timing of the original shows. In general, it comes across as lackluster, especially in its fight scenes, which almost always feel mundane and dull. I'm sorry, but everything about this show's presentation is super bland, except for the show's intro. That looked neat at least. So now that we covered the characters, writing, and visuals, it's time to get to the stuff that truly made Powerpuff Girls 2016 frustrating. Let's start with how desperate the show is to not piss off the censors. This is no doubt the reason why the action in Powerpuff Girls 2016 ended up being so lackluster and tame. However, the show's apparent desire to be as inoffensive as possible wouldn't only affect the violence, and would lead to some interesting decisions. One of the more infamous examples being how they adapted Miss Keen. Like I said before, she's largely unchanged, except that she's drawn without boobs. Before you say anything, no. This isn't me being a coomer and acting like it's the end of the world because a female character doesn't have visible breasts. In fact, the change is barely noticeable. The character looks exactly the same otherwise. But that just raises the question as to why bother? Nothing about Miss Keen's design was sensual or inappropriate. She was just a regular-looking woman, not a dragon-made character. And yet, it seems like the show found her inappropriate enough that they decided to make this change, despite it barely affecting the character's core appearance. It's just this strange little detail that I probably wouldn't have cared enough to bring up if it weren't for the fact that Powerpuff Girls 2016 just felt so fixated on keeping itself as squeaky clean as possible. Ironically enough, not only would the show's attempts at being inoffensive lead to genuine controversy, but it would actively undermine its attempts at being progressive. To see what I mean, look no further than the whole Miss Bellum debacle. Like I mentioned earlier, Miss Bellum was written out Powerpuff Girls 2016. According to the showrunner, the reasoning behind this was, and I quote, "We felt like Miss Bellum wasn't quite indicative of the kind of messaging we wanted to be giving out at this time." Given the lengths the show was willing to go to in order to come across as inoffensive as possible, as well as the wording of this statement, it's pretty clear that the showrunners deemed Miss Bellum to be inappropriate due to her provocative character design. And look, I get that there are a few radar-dodging adult jokes with Miss Bellum that Powerpuff Girls 2016 probably wouldn't be able to get away with, but you could have easily adapted her into the show without those risque moments. At her core, Miss Bellum was defined by her intelligence and being the most reliable adult that the girls could count on. And yet the showrunner behind a series that's supposed to have themes of female empowerment seemed to judge this character solely by her physical appearance. If her physical appearance was that big of a concern, then why not just give her a redesign that tones down her sensuality? Or if you really didn't want Miss Bellum in this show, just don't address her absence in the universe. Have her not exist in this continuity. It's a reboot. You have that power. Now, neither of these suggestions are perfect by any means, but it's still better than creating an episode solely to write out Miss Bellum and never mention her again, while trying to play it off as this loving send-off for her. And just to rub salt in the wound, in the same episode where they wrote out this intelligent female character, the Powerpuff Girls end up needing to be saved by the mayor, a man who is far weaker than they are. Great job on the girl power message, show! This on top of how the girls are portrayed as less confident than they were originally, as well as having their negative traits exaggerated, just goes to show the lack of care there was in portraying female empowerment in this show. The same goes for its attempts at being inclusive. Despite its claims of wanting to promote inclusivity, Powerpuff Girls 2016 doesn't do anything beyond the bare minimum in terms of representation. Bliss, who again isn't a terrible character, just isn't very good black rep. The way she was paraded around leading up to the Power 4 special makes it feel like she was only put in this show to be a marketing device. Plus, there are some unfortunate implications in making your one black Powerpuff Girl emotionally unstable. Besides her, the only people of color in this entire show are this scientist lady, whose only character traits are that she's into the professor and talks a lot, Green Wing, this kind of cool one-off character who's an elderly superhero voiced by Cree Summers, and a couple of other minor one-shot characters that I barely remember anything about. I'm sorry, but simply having a few POC side characters isn't enough to label your show as inclusive. And that's not even getting into its one sort of, but not really attempt at incorporating LGBTQ themes. Horn Sweet Horn was the show's 5th episode and was promoted as being a trans-positive story, which was virtually unheard of for children's television at the time, so this was kind of a big deal. Except that Powerpuff Girls 2016 completely dropped the ball here. The episode's plot is as follows. Bubbles befriends a horse named Donnie, the character meant to be a stand-in for trans people, who feels that he's a unicorn on the inside and wants to become one. So Bubbles takes him to the professor to get a procedure that might do the trick, only for Donnie to end up gaining the appearance of a hideous monster. He rampages across Townsville in a rage until a group of unicorns appear and change him back, with the reveal that he really was a unicorn this whole time. He just didn't know he had a horn under his mane. And the moral of the story is that if you don't feel comfortable in your own skin, don't get a procedure done so you can look and feel like your ideal self, or else you'll end up becoming a hideous monster? Oh no. You can probably guess why this episode wasn't very well received within the trans community. It's just so baffling to me that this episode that was supposed to be this trans allegory ended up feeling like anti-gender reassignment surgery. To complicate matters, according to the episode's writer, the story of Horn Sweet Horn wasn't intentionally written as a trans allegory. It was just promoted as one in press outlets. While I'm willing to give the episode writer the benefit of the doubt here and assume that this is the case, that still doesn't change the fact that they showed caught the potential negative implications behind what they were writing earlier on.
It's definitely not a unicorn, it's just sad.
Plus, this makes the show's marketing team look scummy for baiting trans audiences like that. Either way, it's not a good look. As a whole, Powerpuff Girls 2016's attempts at being progressive just feel super insincere to me. In contrast with a show like Break Up the Creek, whose writers very clearly care about portraying a variety of different cultures, genders, races, and sexualities through a cast of characters who are just allowed to casually exist and let their distinct personalities define them, Powerpuff Girls 2016 seems like it would much rather pat itself on the back for introducing a black Powerpuff Girl who isn't even a main character in a setting that's not very diverse universe and stop there. You didn't have to put on this big show for characters like Bliss and Donnie. Just make them engaging characters who also happen to be people of color, or LGBT, or disabled. You could have made it so that there is just a black Powerpuff Girl in the show from the start. No convoluted storyline or anything to justify it. Have Bliss just exist in this show. In fact, if Powerpuff Girls 2016 really wanted to be inclusive, they could have also made the girls people of color. It's a reboot. No one could have stopped you. Which actually kind of transitions into my final point, and what may have been the thing that really screwed over Powerpuff Girls 2016. This show has no idea what it wants to be. Seriously, gun to my head. I couldn't tell you for sure whether this show was meant to be a reboot or a continuation of the original Powerpuff Girls. Like, the show expects you to go in being familiar with the original series and act as if it's a sequel, but blatantly contradict things about the first show on a regular basis. For example, in the Power of 4 special, Mojo Jojo reveals that he was friends with Bliss back when he was a lab monkey. Only this runs completely contrary to Mojo's backstory and character development in the original show, with him starting out as a bratty monkey who felt the Powerpuff Girls stole the professor's attention away from him, and his jealousy and resentment of them driving him to villainy. Powerpuff Girls 2016 doesn't try to have this plot point make sense within the lore of the original show, nor does it give Mojo Jojo a new motive and backstory that wouldn't run contrary to him and Bliss being friends. It's just, what? What is this show's continuity? Want another example? The Rowdy Rough Boys appear in a later episode for a single joke out of nowhere and are never mentioned again. If you're a fan of the original, you're not only even more confused about whether or not Powerpuff Girls 2016 is a sequel, but you're left wondering why they only use these fan favorite villains for a lame joke. But if you don't know about Powerpuff Girls, then you're just left confused as to who these gender-bent Powerpuff Girls are, since the reboot itself gives no context behind their existence. There are other weird moments like this, but I think you get my point. Powerpuff Girls 2016 never really figured out what it wanted to be or who it wanted to appeal to, leaving it stuck in this weird place where it's simultaneously too different from the OG show to be a faithful adaptation, but too similar to it to be its own unique thing. It's essentially Schrodinger's reboot. I'm honestly not sure why Powerpuff Girls 2016 didn't just commit to being its own thing, considering how tonally and stylistically different it is from the original show. In fact, I wholeheartedly believe that more people would be willing to defend it had it formed its own unique identity distinct from its predecessor. Shows like Teen Titans Go, Ben 10 2016, Total Drama Rama, and even Thundercats Roar have their share of defenders, despite all of them getting backlash for being so different from their shows they're reboots of. And that's because fans of these are able to appreciate them as their own thing, rather than compare them to the original shows. Something you can't really do with Powerpuff Girls 2016, because you need to know about the original show to fully understand what's going on. But why would you do that when this show is so clearly different from the original and actively contradicts things the first show established? The frustrating thing is that you can tell Powerpuff Girls 2016 wants to be its own thing, but whether it be out of a misguided attempt at appeasing OG fans, or due to executive meddling, it never fully commits, which makes the setting nothing shy of an incoherent mess. Say what you will about that awful leaked script of the live-action CW Powerpuff Girls reboot, which is still apparently happening for some reason. At least it has its own identity it was confident in. It's a horrible, horrible identity, but an identity nonetheless. This is supposed to be a reboot. Take advantage of that. I'm sorry, I really tried not to be too mean to this show, but man, Powerpuff Girls 2016 just doesn't work at all. Most of the characters range from boring to annoying, with the few that do work being underutilized. The attempts at being progressive and inclusive honestly feel lazy, and any of the potentially interesting ideas it introduces are completely undermined by the show's unwillingness to decide as to what it wants to be. In short, it's literally everything people accuse Steven Universe of being. I really do think there was potential here, but it simply feels like no one on Powerpuff Girls 2016 really knew what to do with the show, and it ends up coming across as a generic, bland 2010s cartoon with the Powerpuff Girls slapped onto it. As it stands, Powerpuff Girls 2016 will probably go the way of shows like Yo Yogi, as one of those weird, shoddy cartoon reboots slash sequels that will only ever be brought up as a punchline, and rightfully so. That said, can we at least keep Silico?